Hey guys, this is the beginning of Unit 5. Come on, there we go. All right, we're going to talk about absolute monarchs starting out, and then we'll be getting into ideas that started changing as we get into the Enlightenment, and then how that led to revolution. The American Revolution being the first, and then the French were like, hey, that's a good idea. And then they started their revolution and killed a lot of people. And then the rise of Napoleon, and then revolutions throughout the Americas as they found inspiration from the Americans and the French. All right, so we're going to talk about these absolute monarchs that had some interesting fashion. As you can see there, Louis XIV, dressed with all the fancy things. Yeah, that's a guy. By the way, my kids are in here. Okay, be nice. He would have killed you. All right, so.
Well, not if I killed him first.
Oh, well, I guess so. All right, so Charles V. We talked about Charles V in the last unit. He was the head of the Holy Roman Empire during the time of Martin Luther. So he's the one that wanted to kill Martin Luther, wanted to stop the Reformation, but failed to do so. So his empire was mainly Catholic. He fought the Muslims often, and then also, of course, the Lutherans, the people that were following Martin Luther, and then other reformers as well. Trying to maintain a Catholic empire. He ended up having to sign the Peace of Augsburg. We talked about that when we talked about the Reformation. Julian, stop. Hold on one second. Put that down there. So anyways, the Peace of Augsburg, that's what allowed German princes to choose what religion they wanted to be. When I say religion, I mean it's Christianity. But if they wanted to be Catholic, or if they wanted to be Protestant, you'd be basically Lutheran. They got to pick. So that basically splintered the empire, because now Catholicism did not unite the empire anymore. You had Catholics and you had Protestants, and you had some princes that were Catholic and you had some that were Protestant. And so you're not going to see that unity in the empire anymore. After Charles ends his rule, his empire will be divided between Ferdinand and Philip II. And we'll be talking about Philip II next. So Philip II is going to get what is now Spain. And at this time, they were incredibly wealthy. This is the beginning of exploration, which we already talked about. And so they're getting tons of gold from the New World. And it's going back over to Spain, making Spain incredibly rich during this time. But you do get a lot of religious wars in Spain, such as the Reconquista. So the Reconquista was the reconquering of Spain. It was kicking all the Moors out. The Moors were the Muslims that were in Spain. So they conquered them, kicked them out of Spain, back into North Africa, and retook the land. The next thing was the Inquisition. You've probably heard of the Spanish Inquisition before. So the Inquisition, this was basically where they're trying to kick out Muslims and Jews. And if you converted to Christianity and became Catholic, then they would let you stay, but you had to prove it, basically. But if you were a Jew or a Muslim and you did not convert, you were forced to leave. If you wouldn't leave, they would torture you in all sorts of horrible ways and then kill you. And so the Inquisition was pretty tough. So Philip II, he believed his duty was to defend Catholicism, defend the Catholic Church from Muslims, from Jews, from Protestants, whatever. Do whatever you have to do to make it only Catholic, and that's it. So it's going to be pretty harsh during that time. All right, then during this time, because Spain was so rich, we see the beginning of what's called the Golden Age. So remember, a Golden Age in any civilization is their peak time in their civilization, where they are experiencing tons of wealth, and you're seeing a lot of art and literature come out at the same time. Just everything's like in high gear. So this is going to be the 16th and 17th centuries for Spain. So artists, one of the most famous artists to come out of Spain is El Greco, which means the Greek. So you can see his painting on the bottom right over there. So he used a lot of colors, he distorted human figures and stuff like that. A lot of symbolism in his paintings, but usually you'd see a lot of Catholic themes in his paintings as well. He had a deep faith. And then you have Diego Velázquez, like in the top right. He did portraits of the royal family. Pride in his paintings was his main thing, so showing the power of Spain and the monarchy. And then you have really the birth of the modern novel as we know it today. This is still one of the best sellers around the world, Don Quixote de la Mancha. And so that came out in 1605. You can still see the original in Madrid if you go there. But this novel really was kind of getting into how everything in Spain had become so advanced and people became so materialistic because they were so wealthy. And it was kind of this desire to go back to simpler times, when things were easier. So it really idealized the Middle Ages, life in the Middle Ages. So basically, Don Quixote was this guy that thought he was this amazing knight that was riding on his beautiful steed, saving, the woman he loves and all this kind of stuff, and fighting the dragons and being this hero. When in reality, though, he was just a crazy guy that was actually riding around on an ugly donkey. And the dragons he thought he was fighting were those big windmills you see in Europe, those old windmills like in the Netherlands and stuff like that. So he was just kind of off his rocker. But actually, it was the second most widely sold book in the world. It was the Bible, number one, and then Don Quixote de la Mancha was number two. Now that's changed just recently. Number one is still the Bible, but now number two is the Harry Potter series, and then number three is Don Quixote de la Mancha. So Harry Potter beat out Don Quixote. Oh well. All right. But there's problems within the Spanish Empire during this time. You had so much gold and silver coming into their country, it actually created a problem. So who knew that having too much gold and silver could be an issue? But what happens is that it's pretty simple. If you have a lot of gold and silver all of a sudden, what happens to the value of the gold and silver? Well, it drops because there's more of it. So now you see inflation. Well, the prices of things are going to have to increase. And so then, of course, now you don't have enough money anymore. Now the government doesn't have enough money, so they're going to increase their taxes. So you get severe inflation from this, like a hyperinflation. Also, you have a growing population. People are healthier now. They're living longer. They need more goods and services, so prices go up because the demand has gone up. And again, you got all this silver bullion just flooding the market, which is dropping the value over everything. And then when they kicked out all the Moors, remember Moors are the Muslims, and the Jews, well, you're losing a lot of skilled laborers. I mean, imagine like what would happen in our country if we picked a certain group of people to kick out the country. Well, think about how that would impact the economy, like the jobs that they have that would be lost at that point, and the skills that they have that would be gone. And so it's a very idiotic move to just kick all these people out because you're losing the skilled labor force, which drops your economy. And then the taxes. They're raising taxes, but do you think a noble is going to pay taxes? Of course not. They're a noble. So most of the wealth is with the nobles and the monarchy, but that's only maybe 1% of the population. The other 99%, the dirty peasants out there working, they're paying everything. And so now these peasants are paying really high taxes. The goods they need are really expensive. The money they have is basically worthless. Might as well just like throw gold at each other. They're losing everything, and so you're just setting yourself up for destruction at that point because you're not taxing the people that actually have the money. All right, so because of this, guilds, they start taking over business in Spain. A guild is like a union. So think of like a workers' union. It protects the rights of workers, making sure that they're getting fair pay and rights and stuff like that. But they were too expensive, basically, because they were making everything they were making wages too high and stuff like that, and they couldn't pay for it. And Philip II, he kept going to war. Well, wars cost money, and so he was running out of money. So he borrowed money from the Germans and Italians, and they're happy to give it to him because now you're indebted to them, which means they're basically more powerful than you. So Philip, during his reign, he declares bankruptcy for the country 3 different times. And so Spain is going to go from being one of the richest countries, or actually like the richest country in Europe, to where today they are the poorest country in Western Europe. So they still have not fully recovered from this disaster over 300 years ago. All right, and then the Dutch. So the Netherlands, they're kind of like a surprise. They come out of nowhere as being a big player during this time period. So again, the Spanish were Catholic, but the people in the Netherlands, the Dutch, they were Calvinists. So they were following the teachings of John Calvin during the Reformation. So Philip II, he raises taxes on the Protestants because he wants to crush them. He doesn't like them. The Dutch get really annoyed with this. He sends his Spanish army into the Netherlands to put down the Protestants. But William of Orange, who's pictured there from the Netherlands, he's going to rise up to fight the Spanish. And I think part of the word is cut out for you there. But he actually floods like Amsterdam and other cities in the Netherlands to kick the Spanish out. So the Netherlands is actually at sea level or a little bit below. And so what he did is he literally flooded his own country to get rid of the Spanish army. the Dutch will do this twice in their history to defend their country. They just flood their own country and get the enemy out of there. And so William of Orange is going to rise to power in the Netherlands because that eventually he's actually going to become the King of England. We'll talk about that, though, in a couple of days. All right. So the Dutch, they become, after the Spanish, they become the most powerful country in Europe and one of the richest countries. They had religious toleration. They didn't care if you were Protestant or Catholic or Muslim or whatever. They don't care. They actually had a republic with an elected governor. So they were going to democracy before it was cool. Getting rid of monarchies and stuff like that. So that allowed a lot of stability. So you get a lot of economic growth when you have political stability. And also you're not kicking people out of your country because of what they believe. And then, of course, they got really big into the Atlantic trade, going across to the New World, going over to India and stuff like that. So eventually the Dutch are going to have the biggest fleet in the world, naval fleet. They're going to have 25,000 ships, just totally decimating everyone else. All right, so the idea of absolutism in Europe, as far as these absolute monarchs. So it all ties into what's called the theory of absolutism. So there's two things with this, what an absolute monarch is and the idea of divine right. So absolute monarchs, they believe that all the power and their boundaries rested in their hands and their hands alone. You don't need any help. You don't need any advisors telling you what to do. You are the country. You rule everything. You make every decision. The reason why you have that ability is because of divine right. So divine right is the idea that God created the monarchy. So therefore, God put that person in power, and that is God's representative on earth. To question the monarch is to question God. And so therefore, the monarch can never be wrong because then you're saying God is wrong. Obviously, there's huge problems with that. What they did is they just took what the Pope was doing in the Middle Ages. Remember, back in the Middle Ages, the Pope was the main power, and the Pope is supposed to be God's representative on earth, and so to question the Pope is to question God, so you don't question the Pope. Well, now that the Pope doesn't have that power anymore at this point in history, 1500s, 1600s, and stuff like that, now the kings are saying that right has gone to them. The king is like, I'm here because God put me here. Therefore, I am God's representative on earth for France or for Spain or for England. And I'm going to say what happens. If you question me, you're questioning God. And God doesn't make a mistake. So obviously that's going to give them tons of power. It takes a lot of power away, even from nobles. So with this, you see feudalism also declining at the same time and kind of disappearing. All authority is centralized. You don't have these little kingdoms and kings and castles fighting over land. You have a monarch that has absolute power over everyone. Everyone bows down to the monarch. Church authority is also broken down. Now the church is under the state. So before, it was church and state were fighting each other. Now the church is submissive to the state at this point. So this is where countries become fully powerful. As far as why people would be okay with absolutism for a while, anytime there's uncertainty around it, there's a lot of wars, and you need strong armies, things like that. That's when monarchs are going to come in like this. A more modern example to give you an idea would be like Hitler. Germany was going through a horrible economic crisis after World War I. Hitler comes in, he's elected to power, and he promises all these changes he can make for Germany to make Germany a thriving country again. And because they were so scared and because everything was so crazy and they had such an economic disaster, they were willing to give Hitler full power, basically as a dictator, because they felt like that was the best way to get him out of that hole. But obviously we know what happened on after that, is that usually when you give someone that kind of power, that becomes very corrupt and leads to horrible things. And so that's, any time in history, that's where you have to be most careful. Like with what's going on today with this virus, running rampant throughout the world, countries are freaking out, people are freaking out. And when we give into fear, that's when we tend to put people in power that really shouldn't be there. But because we're afraid, we want that person to take control. We want central leadership to solve this problem. But the problem is if you give them that power now, they're not going to give up that power later. And then that can lead to very bad things. All right, so let's look at France as the example, because they had the best example of an absolute monarch. That is the Palace of Versailles there. That was built by Louis XIV. That's the Great Hall there. I was there in January, and it is stunning. And that was the point, is to build something amazing like Versailles to show you how powerful you are to everyone else that comes in. Like, you do not mess with the monarch. and the power of France. All right. So religious wars in France. They had a bunch of religious wars between the Huguenots and the Catholics. So the Huguenots, again, are people that followed John Calvin. There's 8 religious wars there. Catholics always attacking the Huguenots over and over and over again. This is one of the reasons why today France is one of the most atheistic countries on earth, because they had so many religious wars. It eventually created this culture to where they were just kind of tired of religion, because they weren't able to separate really what the actual beliefs are of the religion compared to how these people were acting. Because obviously, as Christians, what the Catholics were doing to the Huguenots is not what Christians are called to be whatsoever. All right, so a couple of monarchs. Let's start with Henry of Navarre, or Henry IV. He was a pretty weak king. He switched from Protestantism to Catholicism only because most of the people in France at that time were Catholic. So he just kind of wanted to keep people happy. He was a middle-of-the-road kind of guy. And then he issued the Edict of Nantes, which is religious toleration to the Huguenots. And so because he was middle of the road, it actually would have worked well, because he's like, yeah, Huguenots, do whatever you want. We don't care. And, if you want to be Catholic, cool. If you want to be a Huguenot, and that's cool too. We're all Christians. Let's just get along. That's great, except obviously Catholic leaders aren't going to like that. Louis XIII then is going to come in after that. Louis XIII, though, was also a weak king, so mainly a guy named Cardinal Richelieu is going to take power and control things. Cardinal Richelieu, obviously, is a Catholic because he's a cardinal. Obviously, he's not going to like the Huguenots whatsoever. So he's going to want to cancel the Edict of Nantes and force everyone to be Catholic. There is a bullet point you can't see, I don't think. It just says weak king, strong people. So Louis XIII being the weak king, Cardinal Richelieu really using that chance to take power. In France, we're going to start seeing kind of the seeds of the Enlightenment. So the Enlightenment is where you start questioning everything. Like, why is it this way? Like, why does the monarch have all this power? Why don't the peasants have more power? If God created all of us, aren't we all equal? And so those kind of ideas are going to start coming up. So with them, though, we start seeing this idea that nothing can ever be known for certain. So to doubt was to find truth. The only way that you're going to learn is by doubting. Basically, just realizing you can never know everything about anything. Also, you're going to see the first time that the essay is developed by Michel de Montaigne. So he developed the essay, which is just an expression of beliefs, which I know you're looking at this and you're like, I hate that guy because he created the essay. But keep in mind, nothing has been more powerful than what people have written. That has what's changed society and has shaped history, is what people write. And remember, Middle Ages, people didn't have expression. They couldn't read. They couldn't write. Now people were realizing, like, hey, my voice matters. Like, I have an opinion about this, and I want to express my opinion, and I want other people to be able to read it and get them thinking. That's going to be dangerous to monarchs. Monarchs, the last thing a monarch wants is a smart populace. When people are smart and they read and they write and they think for themselves, that takes power away from the monarchy. It's easier to rule over dumb people than it is intelligent people. The dumber you can keep them, the easier it is to treat them like a bunch of idiotic sheep that have no idea what they're doing. And this is going to fly in the face of that. Then you have René Descartes, or I don't know, it's French, Descartes or Descartes, who knows. But he wrote Meditations of Philosophy. So again, certainty is never absolute. So the idea that there is no such thing as absolute truth is what they're going to eventually get into. All right, Louis XIV. So first off, looking at that painting, you can kind of get an idea of what he thinks about himself. He's on his beautiful horse there, all clad in all his multicolored clothing, which also shows wealth and power. And what's that above him, flying above and crowning him? That is an angel. That angel represents the idea of God granting him power over France, the idea of divine right. That his power is coming from above. To question him is to question God. So for Louis XIV, he becomes king at the age of 5. Obviously, he's not actually ruling France at the age of 5 because it would just be a big playpen and there'd be like those ball pits and stuff like that. It'd be basically McDonald's everywhere. So he's not ruling at age 5. Cardinal Mazarin will rule in his place until Louis XIV is old enough. At first, he's going to be living at the Louvre, which of course is the amazing museum in Paris today. But several people try to kill him. And so poor little Louis, he's pretty upset because he's like, 8 years old. And he's like, why are these people trying to kill me? And so, I mean, you can probably imagine if people are trying to kill you when you're a kid, are you going to be really trusting of people? Probably not. Not only you're not going to be trusting of people, but you're going to make sure when you grow up, no one challenges you. Like, you will put them in their place. If they even think about harming you, you cut their head off and you get it done quick. And then parade their head around to make sure that no one else is going to challenge you. That's the kind of person you're going to create whenever you, at an early age, put them through that kind of hell. So Louis, when he takes control, he's going to make sure that he is the one in power. No one else is trying to challenge him whatsoever. He is absolutely in control. So the nobles are now in attendance. They were going to collect taxes, help administer justice, and stuff like that. But he's going to put them in their place. I mean, eventually, once Versailles is built, the role of a noble is to dress the king in the morning, to get his meals ready, to turn on the fountains around the Palace of Versailles as he walks by them. Literally, little nobles would run ahead, turn on a fountain. Louis would walk by it. They'd turn off that fountain, run ahead to the next fountain, turn it on. Because there was like 1,400 fountains. They couldn't power all the fountains all at one time. I mean, he had absolute power over them. And then, I mean, the nobles couldn't even look at him in his face. And so, yeah, tons of power. All right, economic growth. He had an advisor, Jean-Baptiste Colbert. And he believed in the idea of mercantilism. We talked about that in the last unit. So mercantilism is the idea of being self-sufficient. That France, as a country, should have all the resources it needs to power itself. It doesn't need to trade with England or Germany or Italy or anyone else. They get everything they need through their colonies that they have. Expanded manufacturing during that time, put high tariffs on imported goods. So basically that gets the people, it keeps them from buying something from another country. They only buy the stuff from France. And then he encouraged migration as well, also. So, the people moving in that had skills. The biggest problem, though, is that he canceled the Edict of Nantes, so the protection of the Huguenots. Well, that's a lot of skilled labor. Obviously, if you're not protected anymore, you're going to leave. That's where we're going to see a lot of Huguenots are actually going to make their way to the United States. A lot of them are going to set up shop in the Carolinas. So if you go to Charleston, South Carolina, you will see the oldest Huguenot church that's still functioning today. It was built there in the late 1600s, I believe. But they still give their sermons in French, which is really cool. So it's been there a long time. All right. So Louis' grand style. Spent a lot of money on luxury. Obviously, building Versailles is going to cost millions of dollars. Totally controlled the nobles, like I was saying. They literally were his little servants at this point, living at Versailles with him, because Versailles was huge. Like I said, Versailles is super luxurious. It's got, I think, 2,000 rooms, around 1,400 fountains. That's where he would go hiking and, well, I say hiking, hunting, that kind of thing all around there. The main thing is it separated him from Paris. He didn't have to be around the dirty peasants anymore. Versailles is about 11 miles in a straight line outside of Paris to the west. And then also during this time, he's going to patronize the arts, so you can see some beautiful artwork come out. And then some of your early writings, Molière, for example, doing comedies and that kind of thing. So there's Versailles. As you can see, still surrounded by forests and stuff like that, with a reflection pond that goes on like forever, pretty much it seems. So a beautiful palace. Again, the goal is to show your strength. Like, think about it. When monarchs or nobles from other countries came to visit Versailles and visit with Louis XIV, this is what they saw, which is showing you the wealth and power of France. So France is going to become the most powerful and the most feared country in all of Europe. If you can wrap your head around that, France being the most feared country. So at least for a time period. All right, that's it on that presentation. There'll be a couple questions for you to answer over this as well. And that will be it for this lesson.